I became an international lawyer due to an insult. It was back in the mid-1990s, and I was doing voluntary work with women's groups in Melbourne. A friend of mine went to the former Yugoslavia to assist women who'd been victims of sexual violence in the armed conflict there. I wrote to her, it was pre-email days, asking what we could do back in Melbourne to assist the women over there. She wrote back that they wanted a clear legal precedent that rape was a war crime. I was surprised and a little shocked. It was not what I'd expected. I replied, couldn't we do a cake stall and raise money for the women? No, she responded. They want rape deemed a war crime. Well, not something one does every day, but I thought, let's investigate this. So the first thing I did was make contact with the newly established International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. And I found a phone number and rang it up, and to my surprise, I got put through to the deputy prosecutor. Now, he advised that in fact it would be useful if we could take information and evidence from the refugee population in Melbourne that had fled from the former Yugoslavia and provide that onto the tribunal to assist in develop precedent. Well, that seemed like a step in the right direction, and I was sure that there was a grown-up doing it somewhere. But I thought I'd investigate it a bit more. So I started ringing around. I rang my former university lecturers, I rang the federal police, I rang international legal experts, but only got dead ends. Finally, I got onto the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I must have been a little bit over-enthusiastic because I got a very blunt response from the bureaucrat. Listen, little lady, if you want this evidence taken, why don't you take it yourself? Well, I don't like being called little lady. So I thought, why not? Let's give this a go. I got together with a group of equally enthusiastic young lawyers, and we did what lawyers do best and created a committee. But after that, we worked very closely together as a committee and engaged with the tribunal in the former Yugoslavia and the refugee population, and we actually came up with really important evidence that assisted in a range of precedents. But it was through that process that I came to know about the laws of war, international humanitarian law, most famously known in the Geneva Conventions and other treaties. And I started a lifelong love affair. A love affair with the notion that even in the very worst of times, there is an area of law that seeks to create a space for humanity. A deep commitment to the idea that at the end of the day, what unites us is deeper and richer and far more profound than the things that try to divide us. But working in this area is also filled with heartbreak. And I know as I stand here right now that across the globe, people, be they civilians or combatants, are being maimed, are being tortured, are being killed by warring parties. And I know that women's bodies continue to be used as battlefields. And I know that this world accepts the existence of weapons that can kill us, kill all of us, many times over. And you know this, you all know this. It's beamed into us, that heartbreak, through YouTube, through iPhones, through Twitter. We see it on the television, we see it in our lives, we understand about it. And sometimes the places I go and the work I do, I wonder at the hubris of a legal framework that attempts to reduce suffering during times of armed conflict. But actually, what I have learnt is that even wars have limits. And the laws of war are more than an aspirational framework for our better hearts. They actually do work. And if you look and listen very carefully, you can see the best of humanity in the worst of times. You can see the everyday miracles that the laws of war allow. Every time there is a humanitarian pause in the fighting in Yemen and thousands of civilians get access to humanitarian assistance, every time my colleagues engage with both sides of the warring parties, both sides in Syria, to ensure the provision of fresh, clean water to 16 million Syrians. Every time my colleagues visit people detained, often in the darkest of places, and last year that happened over 800,000 times. This is the law of war in action, and it may not get headline news, but I fear that we sometimes only hear about any law when it's broken. We don't capture when it actually works and how we make it work better. Last year I was privileged to go way up north in Iraq, and to sit with women who had fled terrible fighting and to assist in the provision of small boxes of essential survival items that would let them get through a terrible winter. Every time the Red Cross trains the Taliban in first aid, stressing the importance of impartial medical care, this is the law of war in action, and I've had the privilege of seeing it work. My first mission as an ICRC delegate was involved in visiting people detained in a conflict environment and to do tracing work, which is putting families back together after the war has separated them. And I'll never forget taking a small message, a small piece of paper this big, of a message from a detainee, getting into a four-wheel drive, being driven for hours into the jungle past checkpoints to deliver this small piece of paper to a family who thought for 5 years that their son had died or been killed. And as I saw the tears flow down the face of the stoic father and the mother overwhelmed with joy, it made me realise that the laws of war allowed almost impossible things in difficult situations. Not long after that, I was visiting women who were detained due to the conflict and security issues. And I was there with my colleagues, a medical doctor and a nutritionalist, and we were there to register these women and also to engage with the authorities on their conditions. And these conditions were harsh. Limited food, hard labour, often in chains. But when I spoke to these women, what I realised is, what they said to me is they missed their family most. That was the biggest concern they had, and particularly their children. And I happened to mention that I had a young son back home in Australia and how I was missing him on my mission. And to my astonishment, they started to comfort me, patting me on the back, telling me how difficult it must be. And I was deeply embarrassed. As a naive delegate, I'd assumed that I was there to assist them and that they would have little to offer me. But what I learnt is that they needed to know that someone cared, they needed us to get access, but they needed the dignity of being able to care back, to care in response. Even after a conflict is finished, the laws of war play a really important role in setting up a parameter about what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. A few years ago, I went to talk to women in Asia who had been forced into sexual slavery during World War II. I was there to talk about the new legal precedents developed at the Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, magnificently stating that absolutely rape was not only a war crime, but could be genocide in certain circumstances and a crime against humanity. But to be honest, I was nervous. These elderly, elegant women who had suffered so much in the past would never get justice themselves. What would they care about a legal precedent developed in a tribunal thousands of miles away from them? I was wrong. As I told them about these developments, they cried, they clung on to me, they expressed incredible relief that what they had experienced was being treated seriously. A crime against them was a crime against us all. Law does not revolutionise human behaviour. It is a clumsy tool for change. but it is a tool nonetheless. We put very heavy expectations on international law, and I think are too quick to dismiss it all when we feel it fails us. And us Australians are a particularly cynical lot. Some research done a few years ago indicated that only 1 out of 3 Australians thought the law of war would make a difference. When that same research was done in countries such as Afghanistan and Liberia, the results were almost inverse. Sometimes I think deep cynicism is a luxury for those of us who have not experienced the horrors of conflict. We spend a lot of time, and rightly so, looking at what is broken, but we need to spend more time in looking at what works and how we can make it work better. How can we strengthen assistance, protection, and in particular, prevention? The laws of war don't always work. And you show me a law that always does, but they work enough to be worth fighting for. We can accept the heartbreak, or we can be committed to something passionately that we believe may make a difference. What I have learnt is that it makes a difference, that even wars have limits.